So, let's have a look.
Testing, testing. English channel, testing. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing. Testing, testing.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Are we good to go? Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is a pleasure to be with you to discuss in a silent audience. This is my first time ever having the pleasure of moderating a silent audience. So it's an experiment for me, but I'm sure it's also an experiment for you. My name is Bob Dane. I am the head of the security unit of the Klingendahl Institute, and I'm just checking with the colleagues if we're good with the sound. Yes? In that case, I'd like you to please put on your headphones and join me for a discussion on a crucial topic in Europe right now, namely how to bring an end to the terrible Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. A war that will soon hit its fourth year since the Russian full-scale invasion, but I would argue already went on for nearly 12 years, if we go back to the Russian annexation of Crimea and the hostilities in the Donbass. And we are discussing today the multiple causes of this war and the possible pathways out of this war. Now, I see a lot of puzzled faces, so I just want to make sure, do you all have an English sound in your earphones? I see people nodding. In that case, we go right ahead, because we have a very full and challenging hour ahead of us. We have no less than 4 speakers, and myself as a moderator that you have to contend with. But we would like very much to start this discussion with a short statement from Kiev by the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Alexander Mishchenko, who will first address the audience. So I'd like to first, before we move to the panel, ask your attention for the Deputy Foreign Minister. If you could please connect the Zoom. Yeah, Minister, we will wait. We will do the Foreign Minister from Ukraine first. Yeah, please, just so it goes well.
Yes, thanks a lot. Good morning, everyone. Your Excellencies, distinguished participants of the forum and guests, dear friends, on behalf of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Andrei Sybiga, I welcome all participants of Paris Peace Forum, initiative launched by President of the French Republic, Emmanuel Macron. This forum has become a vital platform for shaping collective responses to the most pressing global challenges, those that define the future of peace, stability, and sustainable prosperity. I'm grateful that the forum continued to devote a dedicated panel to Ukraine. A just and lasting peace depends on 2 key factors: the political will to defend peace without appeasement, and the complex architecture of building the true peace. Analysis and experts play a crucial role in this process, as it's shown by the international expert group at the Klingendahl Institute established to implement point 10 of Vladimir Zelensky peace formula. Thank you, Mr. Dean, for your and your team's important work. Peace for Ukraine is an issue we must address if we truly aim to restore global peace and security. I wish to express my sincere gratitude to France for its steadfast leadership in promoting dialogue, peace, and multilateral cooperation. It is important to retain Ukraine high on the global agenda. Russia's war of aggression is an existential threat for our state. It is a direct challenge to the rule of law, the UN Charter principles, and the fundamental values. Ending Russia's war is an urgent priority. No one desires peace more than the people of Ukraine. We have always supported peaceful coexistence and mutually beneficial cooperation between sovereign, equal states. Russia's imperial ambitions and neo-colonial agenda are attempting to change everything. They forced us to take up arms to defend our right to exist as an independent nation. We have no other option but to protect our common family of free-minded states from this evil. We are fighting for the restoration of peace, a comprehensive, just, and lasting one. Only such peace can really end the war. Only Russia's abandonment of its aggressive policy could restore Europe's security. But we must think beyond Europe. Russia's war has exposed the fragility of the entire global security system, from food insecurity to nuclear risk, from hybrid attack to energy blackmail. The consequences of this war reach every continent. Restoring peace in Ukraine is not a regional task. It is a cornerstone for rebuilding global trust in international institutions and collective security mechanisms. While the international community spares no efforts to restore peace, Russia continues to reject diplomatic solutions. Moscow is using its familiar disinformation playbook to create the illusion of diplomatic progress. It takes no concrete actions to stop the killings. Russia is intensifying military operations against Ukraine in Europe. It ignores the peace initiatives of the international community. Russian forces maintain their constant assault along the front lines. Each day, Russian missiles, drones, and bombs target civilian areas and critical infrastructure in Ukraine. Russia's objective is to deprive Ukrainians of essential service, electricity, heating, and water during the winter months. Moscow's goal is clear: to force us capitulate. It will not happen. Our soldiers defend our civilized choice. We will never surrender to the Kremlin's ultimatum and unacceptable demands. We will not give up our land, our sovereignty, our right to Russia. The path to peace requires supporting Ukraine and intensifying pressure on Russia. The barrier is a universal sense of justice imperatively, meaning that the aggressor must bear full responsibility. This is a humanistic approach since it will save lives, and this is efficient tool as deterrence to stop war. Is the only language authoritarian regimes understand. If Putin sees that Russia is winning in the battlefield, he will never agree on true negotiation regarding ending his aggressions against Ukraine. This is why providing Ukraine with effective means to fight with Russian occupational army, providing our military with long-range rockets in order to provide a response for the strikes on Ukrainian civil infrastructure objects, these are the main steps to achieve peace. That is why we consistently asking our allies and our partners to provide the Ukrainian army with such sophisticated weapons. Peace through strength is the only option for us to protect our common values. Not only existence of Ukraine is at stake now, but the security of Europe and the future of the rule-based international order. Today, we need to rethink how the world responds to aggression. We call for strengthening collective mechanisms under the UN Charter and regional security platforms to ensure that aggression anywhere meets a joint, immediate reaction. Russia's demonstrative rejection of peace demands a strong response. Strong sanctions must deprive Russian war machine from resources needed to continue its aggression. Use of Russian frozen assets to defend our rebuilt Ukraine must signal the aggressor that there would be no business as usual. Accountability for Russia's crimes must restore justice. We welcome the launch of the tribunal to hold Russia accountable for its crime. It is important that yesterday the Netherlands announced its readiness to host the tribunal's headquarters in The Hague. We must do everything we can to bring those responsible to justice. Security guarantees for Ukraine must create an effective security architecture once and for all, pushing Russia away from its inherent habits of occupying neighboring nations. These measures do not escalate. They do restore peace. They strengthen international security. Ukraine's resilience is not only our strength, it is the world test of commitment to peace, freedom, and the rule-based international order. Together we can turn this test into a foundation for a safer future. I wish you fruitful discussions during the forum and concrete decisions that will bring peace in Europe closer. Once again, I want to thank you all for your unwavering support of Ukraine in the fight against our common enemy, Russia. Together, we will definitely win. Thank you very much for your attention and for your supporting of Ukraine.
Thank you, Excellency. And best of luck to you and the Ukrainian diplomats in a difficult time that might still be to come. I would now like you to ask your attention for a high-level panel of 3 active supporters of Ukraine. And I would very much like to welcome Benjamin Haddad, Minister Delegate for European Affairs, Minister Baiba Brage of Latvia, Minister for Affairs of Latvia, of course, and Peter Wagner, Director of the Foreign Policy Instrument of the European Commission, as we now face the daunting task of discussing how we will meet that very clear Ukrainian vision of how this war should be brought to an end. A vision that was indeed encapsulated already in President Zelensky's peace formula, and it was kind of the Deputy Minister to refer to an initiative that I have the honor of coordinating with a group of experts on how to achieve a sustainable, just and comprehensive peace for Ukraine. But this is easier said than done. And I think we are honored to have experts here that can discuss the geopolitical layers of this conflict, the interstate dimensions and the discussions over a ceasefire and security guarantees that the Deputy Minister rightfully pointed to as an essential requirement for Ukraine, but also the identity dimension. Because I think he was also right to point out that this war is about more than just territory or spheres of influence. It is also about Russia's denial of Ukrainian identity and its right to exist as a sovereign nation. So if we could explore these different layers, Minister Brage, because I understand you have present commitments and you will have to leave us at sharply at 12, I was warned. If I could start with you with a question on that geopolitical level. Because also in the earlier panel, people pointed out this war is not just about Ukraine. This is about the international rules-based order. Russia had major demands of NATO in its ultimatum just before the full-scale invasion. And you served not only now as Minister of Foreign Affairs of Latvia, but also as Assistant Secretary General of NATO. And I would very much appreciate your point of view on these broad Russian demands that would also affect Latvian security, because they want to discuss things like force postures and NATO's deployments. Do you even see this as realistic to come with this Russia to a new European security architecture? Excellency, the floor is yours.
I think we can discuss these questions a whole day, and it won't be enough if we want to be serious, so I'll just give a very short version. First of all, thanks to the organizers for having me, and thanks to the French government for supporting such an important event here. And I think one good point of departure would be reading the French National Strategic Review of 25, which very ably summarizes the significance of the Russian war. Because, again, I would like to remind our problem is not Ukraine. It's not Ukrainian crisis. It's not the war of Ukraine. It's the Russian war. And it's Russia that has brought us to this and into this. And that is the first point of also the strategic review, but also of NATO's strategic concept, of EU's decision-making. So the center of gravity is how do we deal with Russia that has both imperialistic tendencies and that doesn't shy away from the use of force for political objectives. Second point is how do we maintain some type of rules of state behavior in this environment, and that is what we call rules-based international order, where the UN Charter obviously was a big game changer, prohibiting aggression, change of borders, and so on and so forth. And that is also the basis of response of not only NATO, but also the whole international community. And third is how do we ensure that the international community still has an ability to work together and rely on the commitments that we make, that they don't just become words on paper, but actual actions. So for all those 3 points, I think one is that the significance of defense and security at a national, European and NATO level, the actual investment in hard defense capabilities, but also collective collaboration is going to be even more significant than it has been now. So investing in defense and security, internal, external, and hard defense capabilities, including nuclear deterrence, is something that will need to continue. Second point, supporting Ukraine, and supporting Ukraine ever more throughout this winter, because Russians have not been able to achieve breakage of the front, and they won't be able to achieve it. They are pushing hard in various places, but the front line is not breaking, and it won't break. But making sure that Ukraine has the ability to defend herself throughout this winter, in the situation when Russian economy is showing ever more deeper signs of recession, data is actually quite something. If you look at the latest, actually this week's publication of Finnish Central Bank of the Buffett Institute, the deterioration of the Russian economy is faster than predicted, plus the losses on the battlefield is more significant than they were. 1.2 million soldiers killed, wounded in action on the Russian side. So maintaining that Ukrainian ability to defend herself is the second big pillar on which we work. And in Latvian case, together with military aid, humanitarian, energy, and so on and so forth, we give around 1% of GDP to Ukraine, and we will continue doing so. So we slightly change for this winter. We will give more resources to the priority Ukraine list, meaning buying US weapons because they are there and they make a difference on the battlefield. But we also give national capabilities, medical, energy, and so on and so forth. But the third big pillar is the weakening of Russia further. Mm-hmm. And there is no other recipe for returning Russia to peace, both internally, because there is no one indication that any instrument of power within Russia, whether it's political, economy, private sector, religion, media, whatever, there is not one instrument of power that is oriented towards peace. So to actually have any security architecture, that is the first precondition. So, and that means both further restrictive measures that are called sanctions in popular language. It means also political isolation, not letting Russia to be elected in leading international organizations. It's also wide international engagement with our partners across the globe, but also denying Russia money, technology, and partnerships in principle. Mm-hmm. So these three big points will need to continue, and they require work, and it's constantly changing. There is nothing permanent about it, so it's constantly changing, adjusting, and seeing what is happening both on the battlefield, but also in the Russian economy, on the Ukrainian side, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. If I may ask you, in light of your imminent departure, a quick follow-up. Do you see any space for diplomacy with the Russian Federation at this point in time about also the eastern flank? Because we've also seen Russian incursions into the airspace of the Baltic states. We've seen them testing NATO to a point that actually open discussions are taking place if the first Russian combat aircraft will have to be downed by NATO in the near future, and if there's mechanisms to contain further spiral of violence. Well, your thoughts on this would be much appreciated if there's any space at this point in time.
Okay, so Russian warfare doctrine is one. It's not like purely conventional, or then there's somehow separate sub-conventional or hybrid methods. It's one warfare doctrine where they try to achieve certain political objectives. And for every country they have those objectives, whether it's France, whether it's Ukraine or Latvia or any country in the world. So in case of Ukraine, they first try to achieve political objectives. Mm-hmm. Stopping Ukraine's integration in Europe, in the EU, by non-conventional means, non-kinetic means. So taking over political elite. Remember a president called Yanukovych, who tried not to sign the European Association Agreement. And then, of course, the uprising started, and he was pushed out, and that was when Russia understood that non-conventional means don't necessarily work. So they started the occupation of illegal annexation of Crimea. And those non-conventional means, they run against all countries. And it's corruption, it's cyber, it's hack and leak, it's information and hostile attacks, election integrity attacks, because it's much cheaper than conducting a war.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's important to understand that also these type of activities, such as trying to for example, the incursions into airspace, the secret drone flights or other things, it's meant to destabilize the understandings that we can defend.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about losing trust of our populations. So we have to take it very seriously, from one hand militarily, because of course those are planes that have intruded, and it's not the first time. They have done that in Denmark, they have done in other places. And it's shorter or longer, but it has to be taken seriously, but also it has to be taken calmly, because there have to be procedures on our side, identifying, deciding, detecting, identifying, deciding what we do. And if necessary, changing rules of procedure.
Yep.
But the normal method of work is then the Russians are notified, okay, we are changing rules of procedure, you will be shot down next time.
Yeah.
Between military, you don't just act, very suddenly. So those rules of engagement exist, and we fully trust our militaries that they know what they are doing. NATO's military acted very well in the respect, both with the Polish drones, but also with respect to Estonian air incursion. So again, against the wider warfare, against the warfare doctrine, the wider picture, what Russia is doing, if we think that nothing is happening here in France or in Netherlands or other places, we have to think again. They are running very concrete activities, non-conventional for now. So no, sometimes kinetic. In the UK it was kinetic. It was killing of, trying to kill Mr. Skripal.
Or sabotage,
and there have been
or other
a few
things.
other places in Germany and elsewhere. So these methods have been there since Russia was established, and since Soviet Union was established. So it's part of the existence of that country, and we have to take it seriously.
Thank you for a clear message that you don't see much other opportunities than, indeed, as the Ukrainians called it, peace through strength. Have your own defense, your own deterrence very firmly organized, and only then you see a space to possibly engage Russia in the diplomatic field. Minister Haddad, if I can turn to you, not only are you the Minister Delegate for European Affairs, and as such you've been very active in successive French administrations to act on the diplomatic stage, but also when you were a Member of Parliament, you were the chair of the Ukraine-France Friendship Group in the Parliament, and you've long supported Ukraine very actively and warned that the European security and the Ukrainian security are inextricably linked. Now, France has been incredibly forthcoming within the coalition of the willing, a leading role. It has argued that security guarantees for Ukraine have to be material, not just rhetorical, and has even been willing to commit possibly troops. And yesterday, the Russian Foreign Ministry had a long ranting post, as they do, about President Macron wanting to be a commander and repeating the mistakes of Napoleon and everything, which clearly means the Russians are nervous about it. Could you share with us some of the French thinking on how that would work? Because a ceasefire along such a very long line of contact, as we know from our period of experience with the Minsk agreements, and I worked for the OSCE, I've experienced it up close, these ceasefires usually don't hold very well. How would you see these European troops contributing to a durable peace agreement, especially since Russia seems to want to deny them access or want to reject any peace agreement in which NATO troops are in Ukraine? Excellency, you have the floor.
Merci. Déjà, c'est vraiment un plaisir d'être.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here. I see many friendly faces, and I think that this platform plays an essential role on these many topics. We need to come up with a common thinking. So I'm very happy to be alongside Baiba and many other people here. So what Baiba said was absolutely fundamental. This war for Russia, if you look at war goals, this has been a failure. Russia wanted to erase Ukraine as an independent state, and we keep seeing this goal in the maximalist demands of Mr. Putin when negotiating. He wants to neutralize Ukraine, stop it from choosing its fate, demilitarization. When you invade your neighbor and demand demilitarization, this is a bad omen. And I recall that the goal at first was to dethrone the president, topple the president, and replace him. So we've seen these past 3 years a heroic defense on the part of the Ukrainian people to defend their nation and the unity of Europeans and Americans to continue pressuring Putin's regime, as well as continuing to provide military support for Ukraine. This is as much about the security of Ukraine and the security of all European democracies facing the same threat, that is Russia. We see recent drone incursions in our airspace in Europe. We see sabotage operations, cyber attacks against our infrastructure, recurring threats by Russia against security architecture, European security architecture. It's a challenge toward the European system, the international order that's been in existence since the end of the Cold War. Mr. Putin said that the fall of the USSR was the greatest catastrophe. So why is that linked to the security guarantees, as you asked? Well, if tomorrow we get a ceasefire, well, this ceasefire should not be used by Russia as an interlude, as a truce to rebuild, to regroup, to rearm, and to continue its attacks against Ukraine. And as you stressed, I've been going to Ukraine for many years. First time I went was to support the Euromaidan revolution in 2014. Ukrainians know their history. In the 90s, there was the Budapest Memorandum. There was a commitment by Ukraine to give up its nuclear program inherited from the USSR in exchange of recognition of their security guarantees and borders. This was violated by Russia, who signed it. And in 2015, we had the Minsk Agreement, the Minsk processes after the Crimean annexation and the first military operations in the Donbass. Russia violated dozens of times these documents before the annexation, before the start of the war in February 2022. So the end goal is to end the war today, but to bring peace back on the European continent, we need to deter Russia. We need to relearn the language of peace that we have forgotten as we've yielded this place to the U.S. We need to know how to deter. First, we need to continue to support Ukraine. The first guarantee is a robust, strong, independent military. So all the work we're carrying out with the European Commission, the SAFE plan, 150 billion euros to invest in military capacities. We're bringing together the European and Ukrainian defense capabilities. There are opportunities when it comes to innovation, drones especially in Ukraine. This is also worthwhile for us. This is the first guarantee. And then second guarantee, this is what we just mentioned within the coalition of the willing. This is the coalition that was started by France and UK, but it also there also is Canada, Japan. This is to provide European contingencies, not soldiers, of course, but they would be deployed in strategic points in Ukraine to send a strong message, deterrence message of deterrence. We see the world changing. If there's a ceasefire, we will not go back to the dividends of peace and carelessness of the past decades. We see that tensions are rising, tariffs being applied by the U.S., people wondering about the future of American guarantees. This is the time for Europeans to be the master of their own security, and this is important as well. And I'd like to end on this after the Ukrainian minister and after Madame Breje said, but of course, we need to achieve a ceasefire, but there's one country that refuses to achieve this ceasefire and to negotiate in good faith: Russia. And I wanted to stress this because a year ago, 6 months ago, we heard, no, this will be solved in 24 hours. Well, what I see is that we're aligned with the U.S., with the Ukrainians. We say in concert that we want a diplomatic process, we want a ceasefire. The only odd man out is Mr. Putin. He continues to escalate, continues to bombard Ukraine, he continues to issue maximalist demands. And to end this war, we first need to increase pressure on Russia. We just adopted the 19th package of sanctions in coordination with the U.S., of course. Sanctions were announced by the Trump administration. This will put maximum pressure on the energy sector, Rosneft and others. They continue to generate a lot of resources for the military effort. And we continue our work to support Ukraine. We'll talk about how we use frozen assets that are now on the European continent. This needs to continue to achieve negotiations and bring durable peace. But this will, we will need a strong commitment by Europeans and allies.
Thank you so much. Minister Breje, I promised you that you would be able to leave on time, and I don't want to cause a major diplomatic incident with Latvian diplomacy. Would you like to have a closing remark before you go? Yeah.
It's not a closing remark. And, this is also not like we agree on everything all the time, but I think on the very basics we do agree, and I highly appreciate President Macron's and the French leadership in really drawing especially Europeans together, but also beyond. We have in the coalition of the willing, we have Australians and Japanese are joining and others. So it's countries around the world who feel very disturbed by what Russia is doing. And also at the UN. We will be on the UN Security Council from 1st January. And I have spoken in the last 2 years since I'm minister, not yet 2 years, but 1.5 years, to many African, Asian and other ministers. You know, what do they think of the situation? To listen. And to tell you frankly, none of them feels comfortable with Russia violating the borders of a neighboring country. Nobody is happy about it. Yes, they are not ready to provide military aid to Ukraine. That's a different thing. That's the next step. Even though under the Article 51, which is rules of self-defense, when the war started, NATO drew all the legal advisors together to look at legal aspects. How far are we able to provide military aid without becoming party to the war? And it was very clear that the self-defense also covers the parties providing military aid, that Ukraine's right to self-defense is the prominent rule in this war. So, for example, striking Russia's military objects is Ukrainian right of self-defense. That's where Russia is attacking Ukraine from. And us providing military aid do not make us party to the war. But going back to the wider world, that is the basic rule. And that is what was different from the previous constructs we had, not only about European security architecture, but the global rules of engagement. And that is the basis we have to go back to, that this use of force is something that should not be accepted as a basic new rule in the world. And then also, speaking on Russia, I think we have to remember always and keep in mind Russia's 4 Ds that they use in negotiations, which is to delay, which we are seeing time and again, distract. So all this talk about economic benefits and, you know, trali-vali, as Russians say, basically, fufu, is, you know, ability trying to distract from what the issue really is. Yeah, the ceasefire and so on and so forth. Dismay, crazy accusations that Ukrainians are preparing nuclear, some type of accidents, and so on and so forth. So all these points we see in the current situation, and that is again the other perspectives that we always have to keep in mind, that this is not new in Russian tactics, and we just have to be very solid in what we are doing, because we are on the right side of the history and the rules and the world. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister. Maybe we can have a round of applause for Minister Brazi as you pursue more Latvian diplomacy here also in the margins of the Paris Peace Forum. But fortunately, we still have a little bit of time, and we had also a very patient colleague, Peter Wagner, the director of the Foreign Policy Instrument of the European Union. Peter, you also have a long and illustrious career dealing with Ukraine in many ways as part of the support group Ukraine. But now you're the person responsible for also how to use the European Union's vast resources to best help Ukraine, which is a very challenging task indeed, not only to find the resources, but also once we have them to use them to the best possible effect. And maybe if we analyze this war also from a military perspective as a war of attrition, it is clear that Putin is counting on the fact that he could outlast the Europeans and the Americans. Now, he seems to already have outlasted the Americans, at least in financial terms, because they no longer give significant financial support to Ukraine. In fact, they expect the Europeans to pay for this as part of the PEARL, the prioritized Ukraine requirements list that was already mentioned. But the EU has actually stepped up and has devoted significant resources. But you also are a very pragmatic man, and you know that these large sums of money are not easy to come by in years when governments have to tighten their purses. Could you share with us some thoughts what you see about the actual resources committed and also the future of these resources, given how crucial this is? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's important to recall that in the whole exercise, Europe has surprised many. And we have, if you try to look back to February 2022, we had never bought weapons. Nowadays, we are, on behalf of member states, buying weapons for Ukraine. We have, as EU and with member states individually, very strongly engaged, also on the civilian and military side, around 180 billion, sometimes difficult what to calculate, in money mobilized and made available, which was never foreseen until then. So we have done it. It's not just that we want to continue doing it, we have done it already. The situation is not getting much easier. And therefore, I think there are a number of elements, and you referred to them, which are important. On the one hand, member states will have to continue supporting. But, and the leaders discussed that, the leaders of the EU discussed that last week in Brussels, one is looking at additional funding sources, like the so-called frozen Russian assets. And on that one, I think it's much too early for the wider debate, which is already extremely wide, to be held here. What I would like to say at this point is the fact that the leaders show this commitment to use those funds show that the commitment to support Ukraine significantly and also in the long future is there. Now, we also have to admit this is a rather unique, legally and financially tricky situation for individual member states and for the community as a whole. So I think we will need a moment more, and that's what the Commission has been mandated now, make several options available how to use that money. But the money is there, the determination to use it is there, but we want to find a legal way, because the rule of law to which the ministers both referred is key in the exercise also for us. And I think we will see there good proposals coming, and we will see things happening, while, with all my optimism, of course, we have been occasionally relatively late with what we came up with, but we've never been too late. But in this situation, it's even more important to look, in my view, at two other parts. One you referred to, and that is the Ukrainian and the EU's ability to use the funds. Just having money is not enough. We must find ways to translate this money into weapons. Because even if the discussion at the moment is mainly we need more money. In reality, and Minister Bajan mentioned that, they need weapons, and they need different types of weapons, and we have to do whatever we can to translate this money as efficiently as we can into weapons. Just leaving it to Ukraine, which is in a full status of building institution in this area of defense procurement, is probably not enough. They will need also support on that, and we'll have to do maybe also, as we are doing already, a lot of it together by also having member states helping there. On the Ukrainian side, in addition to then really working on the institution building and being able to use this money, they have to also improve the way how it's used in a transparent and accountable manner. It is very clear, at the end of the day, even the Russian assets are backed up by European taxpayers' money. So therefore, what the European taxpayers and all the other international partners expect is that high standards of accountability, transparency on how this money is used are really coming into force. Many areas already there, but given the increasing amounts, it's important to do even more in that respect. And allow me a third point to what you said, money for Ukraine, one part, but us being able to do it also requires that Europe continues working on what we call resilience and preparedness. Our societies have also moved a lot in the understanding of what is this war about, that this is not just some Russians moving slightly further west, that this is really also by now a war which you can say has reached EU territory. And the minister referred to the hybrid threats. If you look at disinformation, if you look at what Russia has been doing, Romanian elections, French elections already a while ago, very strongly most recently in Moldova, it shows that there are hardly limits with regard to what they are ready to deploy also on this hybrid front. But I think Moldova notably is a case to show if the international community, the EU, is standing together and supporting our partners, we can also stand these hybrid threats.
Thank you so much. And as you pointed out, in your tenure within the European Union, you've seen it change quite a bit. You maybe didn't expect it would buy so many weapons, but I also know that you were at the helm both during the crisis around Greece and the COVID pandemic. So do you have any reflections on how you have seen the European Union as an actor change when it came due to the war in Ukraine? You said it has responded, maybe not fast enough. Are there things that you feel really we need to go the next step and do this? Because then we would be, like, for example, on the defense industry, where I know you've also had some time working within in the Commission, so that we are able to deliver faster. Because otherwise, a concern I have as a Dutch taxpayer, we have elections today in the Netherlands, is indeed that we will have thrown a lot of money at the problem, and at the end of the day, still have to buy the American weapons for an increasingly high price. Any thoughts would be welcome.
As you said, I was 10, 15 years ago in charge of defense industry in the European Commission. At that time, it was a niche business. We were 3 people dealing with defense all over the European Commission. Now, the topic is on the awareness level of everybody and is keeping many people very busy, and we have a significantly different role. Now, there is not the silver bullet. We cannot just say we double the output. We've made some announcements on ammunition, etc., but the implementation has always shown how tedious and painful it is, because in reality we still do not fully know what is our industrial capacity, because we have a much stronger separation than the Russians between what is the industry and what is the state. Now we see on the side of the industry a lot of changes happening. Industry proactively putting money on the table. Secondly, we see on the side of, I would really say, all member states, this change in the mentality having happened. If we remember in January, February 2022, when everybody prepared for what was somehow expected in one way or another to happen, we were not sure whether we would be able to get sanctions together, unanimity. We've kept it since then under, by now, 19 packages. So it shows that also on the member state side, the awareness, the acceptance that this cannot continue is there. And now our challenge, and that is a challenge for politicians, is to translate whatever we are able to do and announce into credible financial forecast, because for industry, the key element is, and that would bring a quantum change, if we would be able to give industry a certain perspective, that's what they can expect for the next 5, 10, ideally even more years, because that is what makes industry run.
Thank you. So it is, and that would not only be a signal to the European defense industry, but also to Russia, that you are not going to win this by outlasting us, which I think is one of their theories of victory. Minister Delegate Haddad, if I can come back to you, prior to joining French politics, you were also a think tanker, and of course, as one, I very much appreciate having a chance to exchange thoughts, and you wrote a book about Paradis Perdu, the change in that you've seen during the first Trump administration. You mentioned that the Americans thought that President Trump thought he could end the war in 24 hours. He didn't. It is, of course, an incredibly complex war to negotiate, as he has found out. But still, the Americans play a crucial role. And they also play a crucial role since they are effectively the only ones negotiating with the Russian Federation. And I know that President Macron has tried it in the past, direct contact with President Putin. It hasn't always worked out. I did work in Georgia in 2008. I've seen previous French presidents negotiate deals. I've seen President Hollande negotiate the Minsk agreements. But at least in these moments, Europe was very present at the table. And I also remember the Munich Security Conference, where actually General Kellogg said very clearly, Europe doesn't have to be at the table. Now, I can only assume that as a Frenchman, and to me as a Dutchman, that grates on our nerves. This is a war inside Europe. How would you see the possibility for Europe to manifest some actorness in its relations to the Russian Federation, even though it's very difficult to negotiate with them in the first place? Do you see any opportunities for Europe to cease its reliance on President Trump to do all the direct talks with the Russians? Thank you.
Déjà, avant de répondre à votre question, si vous me permettez, peut-être.
Before I answer your question, if you don't mind, I just want to say that I did write a book on this issue, but what I was struck by during Trump's first administration, many Europeans at that time were in a type of denial and were convinced that this was just a temporary period and that we just had to grit our teeth, wait, and that we would return to normal 4 years later. And I think that actually, on the contrary, President Trump is a catalyzer of pre-existing tendencies, whether it may be the shift towards Asia, which was already announced by the Obama administration, and was perhaps less probable a few years back. But now this is a bipartisan issue, whether it be protectionism that we've also experienced and witnessed through the Biden administration. And what conclusions must we draw from this? Americans have allies, we have a shared history, we can see this on the topic of Ukraine. But I believe that we must also be able to take charge of our own security, reduce our expenditure on energy, technology, but also military. We should also have the means to protect our critical industries faced with this trade pressure and unfair competition. And this is what we're trying to do with the President since the speech at La Sorbonne in 2017. And I would also add to that I'm convinced that this is what it will enable us to reinvent the transatlantic relationship in a way that is more balanced, that is based on partnership, which is more mature for both sides. Now, as it relates to your question about diplomacy, for us, this has never been a taboo subject. The President did have a diplomatic dialogue with President Putin, and in fact, it was President Putin that closed down this relationship. President Macron went to Kiev just a few days before the war, and it was Russia that chose the path of aggression. Just a few weeks ago, there was also a telephone call between the two leaders to talk about Iran after the Israeli and American strikes. But they also discussed Ukraine. So, the question is, what are the conditions of this diplomatic relationship? And fundamentally, today, we have a Russia that does not engage in diplomacy in good faith, and that's what I was saying before. And so we should work at the European level and at the transatlantic level, as we are doing now, to increase pressure on the regime, both in terms of energy and both in terms of military, with the pursuit of our support to Ukraine. We also regularly coordinate with the Trump administration. And actually, it is French diplomacy that has made it possible to realign. You will remember just a few months ago, we had American negotiators here in Paris. We had the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, so that we could synchronize our positions on this topic, in particular with the Ukrainians as well on a regular basis. And there will be a moment for diplomacy, but I think once again that we need to create the right conditions to apply pressure on the Russian regime. We need to also ensure that we are united at the European level, because there is a temptation to play on divisions between European states. And against all of the most pessimistic forecasts, the European states have remained united, but many of us were worried 3 to 3.5 years ago. But we can see that time is not playing in Russians' favor. In fact, it's quite the contrary. We are currently implementing instruments to support Ukraine, and President Macron is losing patience with the Russian president. And we can see that the Russian president is demonstrating some signs of weakness. And so I think that there will be time for diplomacy, and I think that Europeans will step up in that respect.
No, thank you also for that positive sense of perspective. Now, let us my last question, and then we open it up to the audience, is let's say that together with the Americans, Europeans succeed, and Ukrainians, of course, to force President Putin to the negotiation table, and an actual ceasefire agreement is going to be negotiated in one way or another, and we try to avoid all of the mistakes that were made in Minsk, and it is a well-designed ceasefire, even though the line of contact is very long, and we find technical ways to monitor it. There's still one question that then bugs us. What would, for you as a European and as a French leading diplomat, what would the architecture look like? Would the Europeans be in a position to monitor a ceasefire? Would they be in a position to impose costs on Russia if it is violated? Would they be in the negotiation teams? Could you share with us a bit of the thinking that once that first step is achieved, that ceasefire, what happens next? And will we negotiate the underlying political issues as well, or will we postpone these as we have done in the past? Thank you.
I'm sorry to disappoint you. I know that we're at the Paris Peace Forum, and we can think about the context of peace, and these discussions won't obviously happen here in public. There will be diplomatic exchanges that I cannot anticipate. But what I was saying earlier on is fundamental. Security guarantees, because this leads to deterrence and therefore sustainable peace on the European continent. And that's the role of Europeans, and that's why we're doing this work in supporting the Ukrainian army, which is the first pillar of security guarantees, as I said earlier on. And then, this was mentioned earlier on several times, there's also a political aspect beyond the security dimension. First of all, first and foremost, this must take part in the framework of international security, and as part of the UN Charter, we cannot recognize annexations of territories by force. Further, I also think that beyond the territorial and sovereign dimension, that Ukrainians are fighting to be a free European nation. When I was on Maidan Square in 2014, I saw European flags flown by tens of thousands of young people who were targeted by snipers because they were brave enough to wave the European flag, which for them was synonymous of a better future and to do away with corruption. And so the possibility for Ukrainians to continue on this path towards the European Union, I think that's a key condition. It's a very long process. It's one that is very demanding. It requires deep reforms, a state of law, independence of the justice system, fight against corruption, the protection of minorities, and we have a very demanding dialogue with the Ukrainian authorities on this point. But I think that Ukraine is fighting to become a free nation, a European nation.
Thank you. So in the longer term, the architecture looks like Ukraine as a prosperous European Union member state, and therefore also covered by the security guarantees of the European Union, like Article 42.7. That might be a good perspective to work towards. Audience, you've been very patient. Also, I don't really know how that works because you have headphones, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to ask questions to Minister Haddad and to Dr. Wagner for the next around 5-6 minutes that we do have. So I'm looking around. If anybody is brave enough to raise their hand first, please keep it to a question, which means it ends with a question mark and not a long statement. Thank you in advance. I am deterring this audience credibly. You see, Minister? Yeah? No? I don't see any hands, actually. Well, in that case, if this audience is, then I'm going to abuse moderator privileges some more, because I have one last question that I've been stuck on a lot, and that's the identity dimension. Now, I was planning to ask this to Minister Brage, because she knows this very well, but we are dealing with a country, the Russian Federation, that is not only claiming territory in Ukraine and is claiming an exclusive sphere of influence in Eastern Europe and wants NATO to push back, but it's even denying Ukraine's right to exist as a nation, its culture, its language. And we not only do Putin and his cronies just say it, he's written it down even in an article about his denial of Ukrainian existence, they also act on it. In the areas that they occupy, they erase Ukrainian language and culture. This war is also about something much more fundamental. And maybe, Minister Haddad, I'm going to put you on the spot, although Peter, you're free to add because you know Ukraine very well. How could that ever then lead to a sustainable, just and comprehensive peace if one of the two actors denies the right of the other actor to exist? How could that ever be addressed?
Vous avez tout à fait raison, mais c'est pour ça que je mentionnais.
You're absolutely right, and that's why I mentioned the political aspect of the European process and the inspiration of the Ukrainian people. There is this will on the part of Russia to wipe out the Ukrainian national identity, and you mentioned quite rightly the document that was drafted by President Putin in the summer of 2021, just a few months before the war, which was an historical justification of this invasion, and it demonstrated the willingness to destroy Ukraine as an independent nation. There's also the will of Russia to wipe out Ukraine's future, and I'm thinking in particular of Ukrainian children that have been kidnapped and who are today in Russia in the thousands, and this is a crime against humanity. I would like to remind you that this is what justifies President Putin's troubles with the International Criminal Court. And I think that this is fundamental, and this is something that is upheld by the Europeans, but also by the American administration. This must be remembered, and I think all of this needs to be at the core, and Ukrainians must continue to fight for a nation that is free and independent.
Yeah. Peter, maybe on you?
Yes, maybe 2 points I think which are really important. And as you said, I've been to Ukraine a lot. I worked intensively in the country. Now, there are two dimensions. It's not only the question of the sustainable peace. It is, as Mr. Haddad says, it's also there will not be peace by just saying we stop here or we give you some more cities. We are dealing with a country that would, even if we say go up to Lviv, go up to the Polish border, the people of that country will continue fighting. So it's not over just by us stopping weapons or whatever there is. And that is driving also on their side the resistance and the motivation of the people. Secondly, and it is very often exactly the same people who are driving the reforms, and the people who, I would say, the most manifest and publicly visible with the revolution of dignity, as they call it, the Euromaidan, whatever the words show already a lot around it, who have made it very clear to the world and as a majority to themselves and all their neighbors that they don't want to live the way Russia lives. They want to live the way one lives in Europe. And I would always be prudent to talk about liberal democracy, whatever. They don't want to live the Swedish way. They don't want to live the German way, the Portuguese, whatever way. They want to live a Ukrainian way as a European way of life. They are a genuinely European nation. And that's what, with all their culture and their motivation you're seeing, we very often look at them as a monolithic bloc. Look at all the ethnic and other minorities that you have in the country. You had cities where 100 years ago the majority of the people were not of Ukrainian but Greek origin, or in other parts Romanian origin or whatever. And that is the wealth that they're bringing to it. And that is what will really continue making that country move and drive towards Europe.
Thank you, Peter. I also hope that translates into the neighboring countries of Ukraine, including Hungary and Romania, using these national minorities as a bridge that facilitates European integration, and not, as we've seen in the Western Balkans, as an obstacle to further negotiations. I have a remark from the audience, or a question, and you are also immediately the last one. So the first and the last one. Honor and microphone is yours.
Bonjour, je suis politologue ukrainien.
I am a Ukrainian politologist. My shirt is making obvious what I believe. I am delighted with what has been said in your solidarity. I have one simple question. Is the international community ready to accept that Ukraine needs to win the war? We talk about the end of the war, but we never talk about the victory. God knows that war ends with a victory and peace arrives afterwards. The only guarantee of security for Ukrainians is our victory, and this is the one thing we have in mind. As a political specialist, I see a lot of conferences, and I believe that this is not always in the minds of everyone.
No, thank you so much. And as now I will just abuse moderator privileges by answering your question myself. And I know the International Coalition for Ukrainian Victory quite well, and you have amazing colleagues. And I've seen President Zelensky wear that same shirt on TV once when he was giving his speech. And I have to admit, I mean, at least it's very honest. As a Dutchman, I like it because it's the Ukrainian theory of victory that ends with a weakened and, if you ask some Ukrainians, collapsed and dismembered and decolonized Russia. Right? This is the vision of a victory that is very clear in a Ukrainian mind. It is not commonly shared across Europe. I have to be honest. I did some research, if you want. You can read my paper on After Putin the Deluge. And one of the findings of it was the closer you are to Russia, the less concerned you are about instability in Russia, which I always found paradoxical. So a Latvian will not mind Russia collapsing at all. Somebody in Germany already is much more concerned about it. Somebody in the United States is imminently concerned about it. And I've heard some Americans refer to this as a catastrophic Ukrainian victory. And I think you've pointed out where the last thing, and then we will have to wrap it up, is that the views of what a real Ukrainian victory would look like diverge widely among Ukraine and its supporters. And as long as that is the case, the European Union and the European leaders don't really do what they say they would do, namely whatever it takes for as long as it takes. They do whatever it takes for as long as it takes, as long as they can afford it, and it doesn't get too messy inside Russia. And Russia knows it. So I would like to conclude on this not entirely optimistic note, but anyway to thank you for your time, for being with us in this panel about this war that really needs to be brought to an end. And I hope that in the next Paris Peace Forum we have a slightly more optimistic outlook and a robust ceasefire agreement. Thank you all for your time.